There are times when recording, keeping the camera rolling, is an act of resistance. Palestinians are not just documenting life under bombardment. They're repudiating Israeli narratives, Israeli lies about the war, and giving the mainstream a run for their money.
And I want to do it again with you.
Podcasters in the United States seem to have cracked the code when it comes to enticing politicians to talk to them. It's been 18 months, and there's a new level of urgency and desperation in the testimonies coming out of Gaza. The war has been lethal since day one, but its continuation against an exhausted, starved population in a devastated landscape has meant that for Palestinians, death feels closer than ever before. In the absence of colleagues from the international media, Palestinian journalists have doggedly reported on the genocide. Their work has been supplemented by thousands of ordinary Palestinians recording what they're enduring. From videos documenting the kinds of munitions being used in the war to people keeping their phone cameras on, even in their very final moments, Palestinians have ensured no one can say they didn't know what was happening during this genocide. The footage, photos, and written records are also an assertion of existence and resistance, a determination by Palestinians to narrate their own story.
ركز احنا بننحرق وبعد ما ننحرق بنموت.
We are being burned alive and the whole world is watching us now. Ya Allah, I don't know what to say.
The world is shaking around this woman who's documenting Israel bombardment campaign. There's smoke, there's screaming, and there's also a trembling voice of, someone who's really caught between inhalation and testimony. And she cries yet continues filming because the pain must be seen. We want people to hear our stories, to realize how we are killed with brutality and without any remorse or guilt on the part of the killers.
A very important part of what happens in war crimes and certainly in genocide is that the state is not only trying to destroy it as a group and to kill as many people as it can, it's also trying to wipe out the history, the memory of that group, the identity of that group, to make it disappear.
עכשיו נפעל כדי לקבור סופית בעזרת השם את הרעיון המסוכן של המדינה הפלסטינית.
When you record this horror, the world's indifference or inaction is exposed. So in that sense, it's an ethical mirror.
More than 550 days into the genocide in Gaza, and the sights and sounds are more horrific than almost anything we have seen from these killing fields so far. Bombs weighing nearly a ton being dropped on tents, Palestinian bodies flying up into the air. A journalist burned alive at his desk. The shock paralyzed him. He couldn't even move to save himself. And a video retrieved from the body of a medic gunned down by Israeli soldiers. Footage literally from the grave, a mass grave, where the soldiers buried those they had ambushed and killed.
It's one of the most horrific videos, and it goes for so long. At first, in the video, you see the paramedics in their van in the dark, heading towards the injured and the dead that they were going to retrieve. And then all of a sudden, they are trapped and under heavy fire for 6 minutes or so. And then we hear the paramedic literally uttering his prayers of death. And then you hear him making messages to his mother.
يما سامحيني يما هذه هي الطريقة اللي اخترتها يما إني أساعد الناس سامحيني يما.
What Israel claimed in this instance was that the ambulances were not clear, that they did not have their lights on, that they were mistaken identity, that the soldiers acted unintentionally. And of course, what we can say quite clearly, that this was an ambush by Israeli soldiers to kill paramedics.
This is, of course, part of a much, much larger pattern of something that has been going on now for months.
But the blame for the tragedy is not on us. And today we are defending ourselves.
If somebody attacks us, attacks anybody, we have the right to defend ourselves, not that.
We are fighting a battle here to defend ourselves.
In the mainstream media, in Europe and in the United States, The pattern is the following. First of all, the IDF statement is given as a statement of fact. And then there's another statement, Hamas report, and that is given with a sense of skepticism.
Dozens of Hamas targets were struck overnight, with Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry saying hundreds of people were killed.
And here is proof the IDF actually has been lying about what is actually happening on the ground. And there was a lie that then was discovered simply because that phone had survived with the video.
The impulse to document, to chronicle, to preserve for posterity is not unique to Palestinian communities, but its importance is felt with a distinct urgency. It is intimately connected to the past century and more of Palestinian history. The birth of Jewish nationalism, Zionism, in the late 19th century set in motion the process of Palestinian dispossession. Israel was created by carving up Palestine and ethnically cleansing its people from large swathes of territory.
If anyone reads Palestinian history and our encounter with Zionism, then you'd know that Palestinians, under these circumstances of systematic defacement of our culture and our existence, have developed a fever to record their stories and realities in their own terms. Palestinians have always sought the field of documentation and media, art, as a way to resist. We shouldn't forget that Israel has killed, in 18 months of Gaza's genocide, more journalists than all Western world wars combined in the past 150 years.
Israel's campaign against Palestinian journalists has racked up a death toll of more than 230. Surveilled, threatened, starved, labeled Hamas operatives, then targeted and killed, those journalists in Gaza who have survived have, like hundreds and thousands of other Palestinians, been forced to abandon their homes and to suffer the killing of their family and friends. In the face of all this, the journalists have persevered. Their work has appeared most prominently on Al Jazeera, but also across regional and international news outlets.
I'm also afraid walking because any minute anything may explode.
It isn't just Palestinians posting videos from inside Gaza. As they have rampaged through the Strip, Israeli soldiers have flooded their social media with footage. Almost as jarring as their evident enjoyment of blowing things up is their seeming obsession with the underwear and intimate belongings of Palestinian women. Those videos have put an unwelcome spotlight on the conduct of what Israel says is the, quote, most moral army on earth. In February 2024, and again at the start of this year, Israeli generals ordered that soldiers stop posting videos from Gaza. Videos have still come out though, and many more have emerged from the West Bank, where the army has intensified a campaign of ethnic cleansing.
There have been elements in the idea of been posting those posts, right? And there is glee, there's rage, there's also this kind of very disturbing joy, dancing and singing and showing blowing up universities while smoking or drinking. I studied the German army in World War II. Soldiers sending photographs of atrocities to their girlfriends, to their mothers. It's quite extraordinary. And now it's on social media. So partly it's a kind of brutalization that comes to war, but of course it's connected to ideology.
Israeli soldiers taking pleasure in this obscene genocide that they're committing tells us something about this sense of power, to this sense of being invulnerable. But it's still a power that needs to self-assert, to cross limits through this kind of obscene taking pleasure in Palestinian pain and suffering, defiling Palestinian homes. It shows actually a bully is still insecure.
فكروا حربهم رجعت هيك بسيطة وكم من صاروخ وهيك أقسم بالله رجعت أنيل من قبل.
Since Israel broke the ceasefire in mid-March, it has gone about destroying Gaza with a renewed savagery. Rafah, in the south of the Strip, has been decimated. The Israeli government has continued to set up new military corridors, cutting the territory into isolated pockets. concentrating people into smaller and smaller spaces as the bombings continue. The talk of emptying the land of Palestinians is repeated not just in Israeli media, but on the global stage.
Enabling the people of Gaza to freely make a choice, to go wherever they want.
The death toll in Gaza now stands at more than 60,000. Many remain unaccounted for. Under fire, Palestinians continue to document the genocide.
We don't want to show our bodies being ripped to pieces. We don't want to show our men being burned alive. They've dehumanized us, racialized us, locked us up, killed us. But I think for many Palestinians, they don't see a way except through this brutal documentation of these horrors, and also finding in vulnerability some sort of strength. Silence is not necessarily the answer. The answer is to actually document and to make the pain visible, loud, a hope that despite all the brutality and the massacres, that something out of this war comes about where at least truth is reclaimed and power is degraded, and that the Palestinians hopefully will have a better future than the historical rubble they have been living under.
It feels like it's been much longer, but it was just about 3 months ago that Donald Trump swept back into the White House. His election victory came after a campaign that revved up his right-wing base, a lucky escape from an assassination attempt, and a series of viral podcasts that meant the 2024 election will forever be called the podcast election. Over the last couple of years, long-form podcasts in which some episodes can run for up to 5 hours have become spectacularly popular. Numerous political interview podcasts have racked up big numbers. Joe Rogan's chat with Trump, Lex Friedman's episode with Vladimir Zelensky. They've even prompted American politicians like Democrat Gavin Newsom to start their own podcasts. For politicians, podcasts have many benefits. Time is not a limiting factor. Audiences are generally younger, and often the questions are simply not as confrontational as they can be from mainstream journalists. However, are these interviews good substitutes for journalistic sit-downs? The Listening Post's Ryan Kohls now on the allure and the problems with the political podcast interview.
Consider the act of listening. In a world saturated with visual stimuli, the resurgence of audio, particularly podcasts, is noteworthy. Right now, there are more podcast listeners in the US than ever before. Why? Is it the quest for knowledge, the need for companionship during solitary tasks, or is it something more profound, a yearning for authentic dialogue? The tone of a podcaster is instantly recognizable. Take Lex Friedman. Every episode he publishes opens and closes with a monologue.
We live in an era of online discourse where grifters, drama farmers, liars, bots, sycophants, and sociopaths roam the vast, beautiful dark land of the internet.
Friedman's soliloquies are thoughtful, earnest, sometimes self-important.
Now, at this moment in history, it is clear, at least to me, that the flourishing of human civilization hangs in the balance.
The 41-year-old podcaster has built an audience of nearly 5 million listeners. When he began 6 years ago, his subjects were almost exclusively tech academics. Now, his interviews span the globe's most influential figures.
The following is a conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Trump, Netanyahu, Modi have all sat down with him. This puts Friedman alongside podcast giants like Joe Rogan and Theo Von, men with mics who collectively reach 160 million listeners every month.
So the reason these podcast formats appeal to them is that it's an opportunity to go to this friendlier environment. It's often much more casual in tone, and they know they're not going to get the same kind of challenging questions that they're going to get in a traditional journalist environment.
Do you ever get tired? What's your source of strength and perseverance through all of that?
So the downside of the long-form podcast is that oftentimes with a lot of hosts, it's not overly challenging. Doesn't mean that they don't ask good questions or smart questions, but overall politicians like Trump can walk around some of these answers pretty easily.
And by the way, the statistics were a fraud.
Because it's not an aggressive, challenging style of interview. On the other hand, what it does allow you to do is see a human being for 3 hours talking to another human being. And there's actually great value in that.
I did Dr. Phil the other day.
I saw it.
The laid-back, seemingly less pressured podcast space was where Donald Trump focused his efforts during his bid for the presidency in 2024.
I think so too, Mr. Trump.
This all my life.
All right, we're rolling. Good to see you, sir. Here we go.
Trump did interviews with 14 different podcasters during the election campaign. By comparison, his rival, Democratic candidate Kamala Harris, did just 6 podcast interviews. Trump's blitz meant his interviews were fed into the headphones of more than 65 million listeners.
We'll do it again. I want to do it again with you.
Joe Rogan's interview with Donald Trump was the most listened to podcast episode on Spotify by far. His interview on YouTube was seen, I think, 55 million times, which is just a tremendously large number. No doubt that interview and other interviews like it played an enormous role in Trump's ability to reach the large audiences who he was trying to get to turn out to vote, which are, men, in a way that allowed him to circumvent traditional news media outlets, avoid difficult questions.
By the 2024 election, a lot of TV journalism in the US had made a very conscious decision not to just put Trump's speeches live on the air, to not just give him this unmediated, freewheeling access to the audience and to just sort of say whatever he wanted, unfact-checked in the moment. When the Trump team realized there was this other space where he could just go for hours and say whatever he wanted without being fact-checked, they really took advantage of that.
Podcasts have risen on the horizon of a media landscape in flux. For decades, there's been a growing sense that corporate media echoes the establishment rather than challenging it. Access is traded for favorable coverage, and as political polarization has sharpened, media credibility has tanked even further. Trump waded into this debate and turbocharged it.
You are fake news. I find the press is extremely dishonest. And if I'm not combative, I don't get my word across.
A segment of the audience that fled the mainstream news scene the fastest was people in their mid-30s. And it's clear where they moved. 66% of podcast listeners in the US are 34 or younger. Ironically, many of the podcasters they are listening to, especially if they are on the political right, are former mainstream media personalities.
Let's piss them off.
Unleashed from whatever newsroom norms that might have kept them in check.
When you're on television, there's guardrails. I was a host on MSNBC and then on Current TV. And there were certain things that you couldn't talk about, boundaries you couldn't go past. So now you can do content that is directly appealing to the audience. You're giving the audience what you really think, and you're getting to have broader conversations. The downside is, well, there are also sometimes no factual guardrails. So you've got more freedom, but also more chaos. By the way, I come out on the side of freedom. So might you get things that are not true on a Tucker Carlson podcast? Of course you might get things that are untrue. If you're watching radicals in either direction and you don't realize that they might be lying to you, you've got a lot more problems in your life than just politics.
One thing I think that Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson get from having their own podcasts, from being their own bosses, essentially, is that they can really say whatever they want. Megyn Kelly, in particular, has gone so far as to endorse Donald Trump in the last election.
It's great to see you.
She would prefer to put her biases out front and then let the audience decide.
The only way one succeeds in this medium is by violating all those rules that we used to have in journalism, where you don't really talk about yourself at all.
But she still considers herself a journalist, which I think is an interesting dichotomy. I think most journalists would say that the kind of work she does is really opinion and entertainment.
Kelly is one of a few women in a political podcasting space dominated by white men. What she has in common with many of her male peers, though, is a right-wing, specifically Trumpian, political position and a contempt for, quote-unquote, woke politics.
When I slipped and said the trans girls were biological males, this person told me that was offensive. Why did I have to deny reality in order to be polite?
Echoing Trump and riding on themes that he has made into prime clickable content, the chorus of right-wing podcasters rail against political correctness, so-called left-wing cancel culture, and what they say is a censorious media climate.
There Regular promotion of free speech is something that I think really appeals to a lot of their audience, which is, oftentimes largely male. I think it allows a lot of their viewers to feel comfortable, help them establish an ideology of pushing back against what they feel like is kind of woke, kind of cancel culture. And I think that it also has created some very, very strange moments.
If you talk to Hitler in 1941,
such as Lex Friedman's thinking out loud about how he would interview Hitler.
There is a strand within left-wing circles, which is, we don't talk to the other side. And the left wing will oftentimes tell you this. They'll say, Trump voters are racist and fascist, etc. That would be platforming them. I think that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. The left wing has to get way more inclusive. Who cares if you're talking to a right-winger? You also can talk. You can have a conversation. You can have a debate.
In the aftermath of Trump's return to the White House, a wounded Democratic Party has been scrambling to regain a foothold in U.S. public discourse. Podcasts are a big part of the strategy. Not only have leading Democrats suddenly made their presence felt in podcast studios, they're also hosting their own shows.
We need to change the conversation, and that's why I'm launching a new podcast. And this is going to be anything but the ordinary politician podcast.
The first episode of California Governor Gavin Newsom's podcast went online just a month after Trump was sworn in.
I think the strategy for Gavin Newsom makes sense. There's a real sense that he wants to run for president in the next election, and so this is a way for him to kind of develop a national profile. But it hasn't proven particularly successful yet. His approval ratings among Democrats have plummeted since he launched the podcast.
It's hard to tell right now if this is going to work out for Gavin Newsom, because the original pushback is, yes, from that contingent on the left, which is not insignificant, of how dare you talk to someone on the other side. We've got to get past that. It's poison. So he's right on that count, because people are thirsty for a dialogue. And he's doing the right thing by having conversations with both sides now.
We're closing the show where we began, in Gaza. For a full month, no food, water or medical supplies have been allowed into the war zone. Israel has cut off coordination with humanitarian workers, and the targeting of safe zones and shelters has been relentless. Palestinians who have survived the bombing and repeated forced movement face death from malnutrition and disease. Amidst this, the documentation of the genocide has not faltered. We wanted to hear from people in Gaza to understand why they keep filming, reporting, bearing witness in the face of constant danger and loss. Conditions in Gaza meant most of the people we contacted couldn't respond to us, but one voice did get through. Hala Shahada is a journalist. She broadcasts updates on life under genocide to hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. Having been displaced from her home, she is now sheltering in Gaza City, where she recorded this video. Here, in her own words, is why she keeps going.
الوضع في غزة صار أصعب مما يتخيل الإنسان. يعني إحنا حالياً بننتظر فقط موتنا. إحنا في أهوال يوم القيامة. القتل صار شيء طبيعي. يعني كل يوم بيموتوا ناس إحنا بنعرفها. حتى يعني ما بطل في عنا رفاهية إنه أنت تحزن أو تنهار على عزيز أنت فقدته. بس بيكون شغلة واحدة هي اللي أنت بتفكر فيها. الدور على مين؟ يعني أنا مين بدي أخسر؟ الدور اللي جاي مثلا حيكون علي. فهي كانت ردات فعل طبيعية لإنسان أنت بتموت فيه، فطبيعي أصلا إنه أوثق على الأقل يا عمي خلينا أوثق يعني موتي أقل ما فيها. فيمكن لعل وعسى إنه الناس تشوف اللي برا. يعني أنا بحاول دايما أحكي يعني إنه لو بطلنا نصور أو بطلنا نكتب مين حيعرف فينا أو مين حيعرف قصصنا. كل صحفي فينا بيعرف أصلا إنه إحنا يوما ما حنكون حاضرين على كتابة التاريخ. يعني إحنا اللي بنصنعه حاليا أو اللي بنصوره حاليا سيكتب غدا. يعني إحنا حابين إنه إحنا اللي نكتبه، مش يجي حدا أصلا ما عايش ظروف الحرب والإبادة يكتب عنا. لولا جهود الأبطال الصحفيين كان العالم ما عرف فينا، كان إحنا متنا ولكن متنا بصمت. إحنا حالياً بنموت ولكن على الأقل في ناس تانية بتعرف إنه إحنا بعدنا لسه بنموت.